start over again. Sorry.
Listening to the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Erin.
I'm Bree.
And I'm Rachel.
Today we get to wrap up another book club. I think this one is my favorite maybe so far. This book was super duper fun to read, and there were a couple people who didn't like it. So as always, I think we got both sides of the coin. As usual, I now have a newfound love of travelogues. My current book is also a travelogue because apparently these are books that I never knew existed that I also need in my life. So our book this time around was Travels with Charley in Search of America by John Steinbeck. And I keep telling people about this book because of how super fun it is. So Rachel, as usual, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. This one was, this is, I think, the third time I've read this book now. And I was so glad that I had the opportunity to read it in community with fellow Lutheran ladies. For those of you who do not know, Travels with Charley in Search of America was a book written in 1962 by John Steinbeck, who you may remember from such great American novels as The Grapes of Wrath, Of Mice and Men, and those other books that people are required to read and usually hate in high school.
You know what? True story. I had never read any John Steinbeck before this, but I now have another one of his lined up for me to read.
Nice.
Because I so enjoyed this.
I have also never read Steinbeck before, so I also need to read them.
I think I read The Pearl before this, which I did not enjoy, I'll be honest. But I was a very young person at the time, and my tastes had not yet become as fine as they are now. So I need to go back and reread some more Steinbeck.
Wine at that time.
Yes, quite literally. John Steinbeck, who eventually won the Nobel Prize in Literature, had written the great American novels of the Depression and the years following. And by the time he got to be a middling to oldish man, was rich, famous, separated from the everyday common folks of the American reality that he had written about all those years ago, and was feeling really uninspired and disconnected. And so he decided to get back out there, get to know America again, but he wanted to do it kind of anonymously because he's like, I'm John Steinbeck. They're all going to know me. Spoiler, no one ever recognized him.
Nobody knows him.
It's like Tony Hawk traveling these days. If you ever seen
exactly. But to do this, he got himself what was at the time a fairly nice camper on the back of a truck. And he and his dog, Charley, got in and drove it all the way around America. And so this book is an account of his journey and the people he met along the way and what he learned about America on the way. And it's really fascinating because this time in the 1960s was a real transition point in America where we were going from, the last of the agricultural people were leaving the farms. We were going from the atomic age. There are people alive at the time who remembered horse-drawn buggies and no indoor plumbing or electricity or anything like that. And yet there are also, planes crossing the Atlantic and television and all these things. So it was a real crucial time in America trying to figure out who we are in this really first world reality. And I think Steinbeck does a really awesome job of trying to distill that tension, that American restlessness that I think is so prevalent even today. So that was good fun. But enough about me. Sarah, I know what you thought about it. Bree and Erin, any initial thoughts before we dive into our actual book club discussion of the book?
I would say this was a really fun audiobook for road trips, I think, fittingly enough.
Yeah.
I listened to this book actually back at the end of June, so I might, disclaimer, I might be a little foggy on some parts when we drove out to North Carolina for vacation, and it's just a fun little read. I think, obviously there are some poignant sections of the book but definitely don't like crack open Of Mice and Men and expect it to be of that any sort of joyful caliber that I read about in this book. Because it's a little, some of his other stuff's a little darker, I think.
Yeah, you're right.
The one thing that I wanted to note, because you all know me, hashtag psycho dog mom, like I really loved Steinbeck's ability to like portray the idiosyncrasy of like dogs and like being a dog owner and the companionship that we share with dogs. And I just thought, you know, if you are a dog person, you consider your dogs to be your children. Like if you're of that mode, I would definitely give this book a read, because it was very cute, and I think just a good read and very relatable as a dog owner.
I love that Charley was his own character and almost human because of, and he like has conversations with him, and it's wonderful.
And yet he respects him as a dog all throughout.
Right.
You know, like he doesn't treat him like a baby. It's like,
No.
I am a man, you are a dog, and I totally dig that and respect you as a dog person. And the mutual regard that the two of them have for each other is just splendidly written.
Yeah, Charley wouldn't be a baby. He'd be like a middle-aged man with one of those cute little hats and like tweed and suspenders. That's how.
Yeah, it'd probably be like John Steinbeck. It would be like two middle-aged dudes on a road trip.
Only question is, would he be smoking a cigar or a pipe? Pipe.
It'd be French though. Wouldn't he have those like really thin cigarettes?
Yeah, that's true. He's French.
Sorry. These are the things I think about all the time.
Yeah, I also I enjoyed it. I thought he had, and this is what made me decide I would actually seek out another of his works to read, was he had just such an incredibly vivid way of describing both a physical place, a geographical location, and also the people that he would interact with. And they were painted so clearly in my mind, and I really enjoyed that. And so that's why I decided that I would give another one of his works a try. Now, I might end up being like, well, maybe this will end up being my favorite of his works. Who knows? But I couldn't resist it because the language was just so beautiful. And not like, yeah, it was just masterfully done. Maybe that's the better term than beautiful, because it wasn't necessarily just flowery and overwrought or anything like that. It was just so clearly described without going on and on as I have just done. Like that.
But he's particularly good at that, like at being descriptive of both people and place.
You have these images in your head the whole time you're reading it because of the way he's able to describe things, which is like, I feel like I went on the road trip with him because I have these images of like memories of going with him just from reading the book.
Yes. Yeah, he is obviously a master at the height of his craft. So when he tells you things like, oh, I felt like I was losing my edge and I needed to... No, don't believe him.
You know what I did read, though, that was kind of interesting? As I was crafting my answer for today's episode, somebody like really went and like fact checked this book.
Yeah.
Are you aware? Like, does that happen with books?
Especially with memoirs. Yes, it does. Especially older memoirs. I mean, like, for example, this is a very famous example. You probably think that everything in Little House in the Big Woods, the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House books, that's a factual memoir. Yes and no.
You're bursting my bubble here.
Yeah, no, it's as Steinbeck, I love this quote from the book. It's based on, but not limited to, facts. And
yeah.
Well, all I know is I'm spoiler alert, I'm answering question number 4, but like you do a Google search of travels with Charley social issues, and like the top 5 hits on Google is this Bill Steinwendel, or who, I'm not sure I'm getting his name right, but like he had this big, like, anti-travels with Charley agenda and was, like, fact-checking everything. It's like, it's not even like the Cliff Notes, like, pay for this essay to turn in, like, $26, join this Cliff Notes membership thing. It was all, like, about this guy kind of grinding an axe against travels with Charley.
And there's, I mean, well, anytime someone comes and writes a memoir that they play with their own memories, you know? And certain people get very offended if it is not 100% factual. Steinbeck didn't set out to do a journalistic report. He set out to figure out the spirit of America. And he himself admits he didn't take really great notes all along the way. He was too busy living the trip, to do that. And so you have a choice in reading any memoir like this. You can either say, it's not 100% factual, I'm mad, and throw the book across the room. Or you can say, it's not 100% factual, but he speaks a lot of truth here.
Mm-hmm.
I think I want to keep reading it because it's so enjoyable and it's given me so much to think about and ponder. And that's sort of where I come with this book. He's a novelist. Cut him some slack.
And if you want to see what I'm talking, okay, so the dude's name is Bill Steigerwald, and he has the website truthaboutcharley.com.
Oh, bah humbug.
And I think coming from a love of historical fiction anyway, where the stuff that you're reading in historical fiction novels, a lot of it, at least the stuff that I read, is based on true events and true things in history. But going into it that like the main character in the book is probably made up and not all of the things in the book probably happened. Having that mindset going into this, it's like, yes, it's a travelogue. Yes, obviously he went across the real United States, but
he did make the trip.
Right. Like he made the trip. The rest of it, I mean, there's, as we'll talk about, there's a lot in here that it's very applicable to culture then and culture now. So,
Sorry, didn't mean to derail the train here.
I just sort of figured that it was artistic liberty, and he sort of merged. He would merge 5 different people into one character that he then wrote about to communicate this concept of it. So I wasn't put off by it not being a 100% history book.
Right.
I feel like it's a memoir, which implies there's liberty. I mean, memories are not reliable to begin with.
No,
memories it's a memoir. So yeah.
Did he write this after he came back from the whole trip? Do we know?
Yes.
Like how he actually wrote it?
Yeah. No, he wrote it when he got home.
Yeah, you try going on a 3-month trip and then coming back and writing everything accurately. It doesn't happen.
And also, I'm going to call foul on Bill Steigerwald, Bree, because he may have fact-checked Steinbeck to death, but he also set out to recreate his journey and then wrote his own book called Dogging Steinbeck. So maybe he's got an ulterior motive.
I think you're right.
Oh my goodness. I almost want to read it just to see, but that probably is cool.
I may be going out on a limb here, but I'm going to guess that Bill Steigerwald maybe isn't quite as good a writer as John Steinbeck. So reader beware.
How long? I had the impression that somehow this was a much longer. This was only 3 months,
wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I was slightly disappointed that he didn't actually go to all 50 states. Like going into it, I thought he was going to go to every single state, and he like just made a big loop. I was like, what about us?
Sorry, Missouri.
Sorry.
Well, and by the time he got to Virginia, he was so sick of being on the road that he basically just went through at 70 miles an hour. I mean,
it's true.
Yeah.
So it's not comprehensive. Although it's still, but he did actually complete the circuit, which is more than I can say for a book like Bill Bryson's Walk in the Woods, where he set out to hike the whole Appalachian Trail and then cut out like when he got to Massachusetts or something, did not go all the way, and then just sort of hurriedly finished the book and said, sorry, hope you enjoyed it. I did. I learned what I had set out to do.
I'm okay being America's donut hole because those are delicious.
So anyway, that's Steinbeck did, to his credit, at least make the circuit. He didn't ditch Rocinante, the travel camper in Georgia, and fly home, which another author might well have done.
Yeah. I love that truck, by the way, and the name.
Yeah.
The whole premise behind it.
Is there
Super
a
cool.
picture of it?
Is
there a photograph?
I'm sure you can find one if you search John Steinbeck Rocinante. And the truck was named for Don Quixote's horse.
Yes, exactly.
So Don Quixote, the famous wannabe knight from Miguel Cervantes' early novel.
There's totally pictures.
Sci-fi series features a spaceship named Rocinante. So now I know.
I don't know if this is the real thing, but there is a model. It looks like it's a part of some exhibit.
Yeah. I love how we're all Googling this right now and none of us did this before.
I did it before. I'm just redoing it now.
Oh my goodness. Yes, there is a camper. And now I want to go visit wherever it is.
That is tiny. Okay, so
tiny.
Now on display at the National Steinbeck Center in Salinas, California.
John Steinbeck Rocinante, and you will be just blown away by how cute this rig is.
It's so cute.
Super cool. I want to go see it.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Okay, so we all liked the book, even in spite of its limited fealty to the actual facts of the trip. We all appreciate Steinbeck's writing. Let's dig into some of the nitty-gritty details. We had only 6 book club questions this time because I got under the weather and couldn't fill up the page quite as full as usual. But as we always do for these book club recap episodes, I would love it if each of you would pick one question that we can talk about in a little bit more depth here on the podcast. I think Erin should go first.
Same.
So I wanted... Still sort of torn on which question. I am going to say that while I was reading this book, Bree read it on a road trip. I also read it while I was traveling. And I actually traveled to Maine while I was listening to it.
Nice.
And it was also an audiobook. And so I loved listening to it while I was in Maine. And I was like, while I was there, we had potatoes. And I was like, did you know that Maine is a potato state? So I had a great time lobbing out various facts that I had learned.
Hilarious.
They were delicious potatoes as well, let me tell you. They were like almost like a Yukon Gold, but they weren't gold. They were so tasty. One quote. This is sort of getting at question 1, but I did want to share it. But one quote that just rang so true to me was when he was talking about autumn in New England, and he had spoken to this native New Hampshire woman. He wondered if it sort of got old if you lived there all the time. And she said that the autumn never failed to amaze her, to elate. It is a glory, she said, and can't be remembered, so that it always comes as a surprise. And I loved that concept because as I think about it, indeed, that is how it feels. There are certain visual places in the world where the beauty is so intense that your mind, it can't hold on to it. It can't remember it. And then when you go back again, you're struck anew by just how shockingly beautiful it is. Your mind, it can't be remembered. And I thought that was very striking. One piece that I found myself resisting was when he talked about roots and the idea that Americans, they just don't like roots. And that's why they keep moving. And it's the people in Europe who have roots. And that did not resonate to me, mainly because I think it's because I did move around so much as a kid and a young adult. And so I definitely recall thinking that I had reached a point where I was like, I want roots. I want to stay somewhere. And I don't want to keep moving and constantly starting over again. And I had that longing for roots. And I don't know, maybe maybe it's one or the other. Maybe either if you start out with roots and you long for them, or you have them and then you're like, I feel root bound, and you want to dig up and move somewhere else. But that was one piece that he said that didn't quite ring true for my experience.
Well, it's interesting, and you're sort of getting we're now talking about some of the things that were raised when we talked about question 3, and that is, how true is the book, and how well does he fulfill his own mission of getting to know the spirit of America? And that part that you mentioned did actually come up during our book club discussion, and especially this quote where he says, "Could it be that Americans are a restless people, a mobile people, never satisfied with where they are as a matter of selection? The pioneers, the immigrants who peopled the continent were the restless ones in Europe. The steady-rooted ones stayed home and are still there." And so, he's pointing out, and I wonder if this is a part of the American spirit that changes as time goes on. But with a few exceptions, quite a few exceptions, the Native American tribes, for example, and all the Africans who were brought over against their free will, who definitely, you can't really judge restlessness based on that. But for all the European immigrants, and more recently, the people who have come from Asia, from South and Central America, from Africa within the last 50 years or so, all of those people were the ones who left, the ones who picked up and said, "What I don't know what it'll be like there, but it's got to be better than here." And so there is a sort of restlessness at the heart of the American origin story. And yet you're right, all the people who came here, you see them sort of dividing down the middle between the people who want to find a spot, put down roots, and stay there, and the people who just keep on moving. But I think he ran into more of that latter crowd, partly because he was going across country in a really cool looking camp trailer. And anyone who saw him said, "Ooh, can I come?"
Right.
That sounds really fun. Let's go. So I think maybe he got a slightly unbalanced view of the restlessness of American people. If I were traveling the country in a really nice travel trailer, I'm sure a lot of the people I stopped and talked to would be like, well, I thought I was rooted, but looking at that, I'd kind of like to go.
And I don't know if anybody else had this reaction, but I was struck with little wanderlust bug after reading the description and sort of hearing him talking about mobile living and how, it's cost effective, and there are downsides necessarily to putting down roots. And so as I'm listening to him romanticize this whole mobile living and traveling from place to place and drinking whiskey out of plastic mugs, I'm just like, wow, I really want that for myself. Even though 5 minutes into it, I'm going to be like, I really don't want this for myself.
Yeah, at least one person. I'm looking here at a comment from one of our book club participants, Elizabeth Decker. She wrote, "As I read the book, I kept thinking, wow, I want to do something like this. Now I just have to talk my hubby into getting an RV." And I think that there were probably a lot of people who have read this book, but you're right. Even Steinbeck himself, after 3 months of the road, he's like, "I'm so done. I want to go home. I want to sleep in my own bed. I want to see my wife," And so there's, even in Steinbeck's own life, we see this balance between the restlessness, I want to get up and go, and the rootedness, I just want to go home. They're both there.
Yeah.
Yep. I actually read this right after I'd gotten back from our last vacation trip of going 3 trips in 6 weeks or something crazy, and the last one, and then I read the book, and so I was having these flashbacks of all of our traveling and all the feels of seeing all these magical places, but at the same time I was also I am so glad I'm not traveling again. I love going places, I love seeing things, I love coming home and not going anywhere for a long time. It was
kind of a stressful return for you, was it not?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, our travels have been, yeah, anyway. But yes, I think maybe I'm more on the side of somebody who likes having roots. I like I like having a home base. I like going out places and seeing things and experiencing, but I definitely, like, I never want to move again. I like being where I am, and I'm good with that. I grew up in the same house for 21 years of my life, though. So I come from a very different background than you do, Erin, because I had roots, and my parents are still there in the same house. So, like,
and yet, like, even today, you see these small, like, subcultural strands of people living out of, like, Airstreams and Volkswagen vans and school. Like, there's a whole, like, if you go onto Instagram and search for the hashtag schooly life, like, people
van life,
like, they just, they take school buses, they take old school buses and, like, outfit them for mobile living like that, or even like shipping crate homes. Like, there are these strands of subculture, I think, sort of weaving throughout that maybe he's right. And there's always going to be at least some people who, like, they don't want to be tied down to anything.
Yeah.
Yep. I would love to be tied down, but turns out that I'm moving in 3 weeks, and this will be, I think, approximately my 25th home in life. So,
oh my goodness.
I'm just estimating at this point, but it's number 11 or 12 since I've been married, and I had a migratory childhood. So I understand this tension, at the same time, I feel like I just want to go somewhere and live long enough to see an apple tree grow up. But then on the other hand, after 2 years, I'm like, the only time this place is going to be clean is when we move out. So that had better happen soon.
Yes.
And that, too, is the American spirit.
Indeed. Indeed. The other part of the book that, again, struck, I don't know, it got me thinking, but so this was indeed one of the other questions. So I'm claiming 2 questions, I guess. Was the the question on the topic of, like, the definition of manliness.
Yes.
And he had this, like, just very I'm gonna have to just read, but, like, this very violent definition of manliness.
John Steinbeck was a man's man.
Yes, the man's man who he says, I have always lived violently, drunk hugely, eaten too much or not at all, slept around the clock or missed 2 nights of sleeping, worked too hard and too long in glory, or slobbed for a time in utter laziness. This idea of this fierceness that is an essential quality of manhood. And to an extent, I'm like, yes, I think that is a valid definition of manliness, but I don't think it's as comprehensive as he wants it to be.
No.
Because I also think about my grandfather, who was this gentle man who had 6 daughters, but still was very much, he was a man. He did not live violently. He, like, drank a whiskey slush, like, 3 times a year, maybe. And there's not a lot of whiskey in this whiskey slush.
More slush than whiskey.
Exactly. He did not eat too much, but he did eat. He did actually sleep regularly. He had a bit of a tendency to nod off there unexpectedly regularly, but definitely did not stay up around the clock. And he worked hard, but he also, like, spent a lot of time with his family. And so he's, in a way, sort of like the exact opposite of much of what Steinbeck seems to be describing here. But that's also a totally valid example of manhood and manliness. And I think right now in our society and our culture, we're really struggling with these opposites. And it seems like we tend to say it's one is wrong and the other is right, and that's the only way of it. And I think that's part of what has gotten us into such difficulties in a whole lot of topics. The social issues that we struggle with right now is the idea that it has to be one way, and the other, if it's not that way, then it's abnormal and perverse and wrong. I don't know. So that's the other part that I think there is room for Steinbeck's definition here of manhood, and that there is that fierceness that some people have and keep their whole life or wish they had and miss it when it's gone. But there's a whole spectrum of it. And it can all be manly. That was another part that I sort of, as I read it, I resisted a bit of what he was selling.
Yeah, I think historical context here really helps too in understanding, his question later on in the book of, this used to be a nation of giants, where have they gone? When we talk about the transition that was happening in the post-industrial age in America, think about, it was in recent memory that you had men digging the Erie Canal with shovels. You had lumberjacks who were cutting down trees with, like, trees that were, the size of a house with hand axes and crosscut saws. You had people building railroads across the entire country with sledgehammers. That this was the kind of masculine strength on which, America's modern foundation was built. But at the time that Steinbeck was writing, that kind of strength had been replaced by automation. It wasn't necessary anymore. So he was having to wrestle with this idea of, like, well, I thought being a man meant being Paul Bunyan or John Henry, but those guys are unemployed right now. And so I'm going to need a different working definition here. I sure hope there are some heroes like that still available. So he's having some wistfulness for that bygone era where masculine strength was really, truly valued and useful. And I think we also are still in that era where we're not sure what to do with this kind of fierceness, violence, physical manliness. But I like, as soon as I put this question up about, manliness, I want to thank Deborah Miller for chiming in and saying, I think a man is someone strong in faith. With a foundation in the word. And this is where the Christian worldview really helps us out. That to be, as you describe your grandfather, Erin, that the kind of strength he had was one built on love, service, self-sacrifice, faith. These are the things that make a man. And, Steinbeck, I think you're right. He did sort of struggle to figure out how to understand his own manliness. And with that, I think his wife's womanliness, which he really appreciated. And I appreciated that he really respected her for that. But yeah, I think anytime you attempt to define masculinity or femininity outside of scripture, you run into these kinds of, but what about so-and-so? It's an incomplete definition if you look at it from any other angle than God's angle.
Yeah, we have I feel like we have two different definitions of what that means, depending on whether you're looking through our Christian worldview or from a world point of view of how a secular society would view a man, because we base our values on two different things. And so if you don't have those same values at the base of who you're trying to describe, what you're trying to describe, that identity you're trying to find, you're never going to end up in the same place, because you start off in vastly different corners. So
yeah,
I mentioned in my response to that question, especially regarding his struggling with his own manliness and appreciating his wife's femininity, that comparing those two doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. And I think so often in our culture today, especially because this is pre-sexual revolution,
yes,
the 1970s. So we're reading this post all of those things that have happened since then. So we have a very different cultural lens through which we're discussing this. But so often nowadays we're like, well, men have to be one way, women have to be another way. But we try to balance them out in a way that, or we get really upset when we try to lift one group up and think that oppresses the other group, when that isn't actually the case. Lifting up women and women's rights and whatever that means, and I won't even go there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're putting down men. But that goes the opposite way as well, that appreciating a man's manliness and what men contribute to society doesn't mean that we're putting down women either. And that is a hard thing for our culture to wrestle with.
Because if somebody's winning, someone's got to be losing, right?
Right. And that
If
isn't how it
women are
works.
winning, men must be losing, or vice versa. And I think I'm really thankful for Steph Schulte. She has such a way with her words and just this clarity of thought. She asked this question that still sticks with me. She says, speaking of marriage, why can't we have two smart people who work together and complement each other's strengths and weaknesses? Wouldn't that be fun to watch?
Wouldn't it though?
Wouldn't it? And that is the kind of marriage that we actually see on display in this book. We have a man who's comfortable with his masculinity, a woman who's comfortable with her femininity, and they're just enjoying life together. I mean, they're not all together but they look forward to being together and celebrating their differences, but also their commonalities. And I think that I wasn't going into this book, I didn't expect to see, an inspirational model for marriage. But there it is, peeping through around the edges, that this is there. So I'm thankful for it.
Yep.
All right. We got a couple other big questions to get to before we wrap this up. So who wants to go next?
Let's keep this social issues train rolling, shall we?
Let's do chugga chugga.
So I picked question number 4. Basically, what this question is talking about is, okay, Steinbeck obviously talks about different social issues that he experiences in his travels throughout the country, speculates about the problems of his day. Which of the social issues he comments on in the book feel especially familiar and relevant to us today, and have his observations and projections generally proven true over time? After finishing this book, and this is like strangely comforting in a way. I don't know why. I think it's kind of terrible that it's comforting. But like the strongest example that I can think of in that book of social issues is the issue of race and school integration back in the late, would it have been the late 50s?
This was in 1960 that he took this trip
1960.
around.
Okay, so when he's driving through the South and he's in New Orleans and he actually experiences Ruby Bridges, who is the black girl who goes to, is it William Frantz Elementary maybe? She's basically the first black girl in the area to be integrated into an all-white school. And so this was a huge moment for the civil rights movement, and seeing what Steinbeck saw with the cheerleaders, who were these stout middle-aged women who like stood on a podium and screamed about integration, and not only being aggressive towards Ruby Bridges, but like, I guess what I would call integration sympathizers, because there was that additional story of a white boy being, I believe, being escorted to his school as well. And so there was almost a stronger response to that there would be white people who are like embracing integration and like being fans of it and seeing merit to it. So I think today we still see an antagonism towards rights for people of color. I think we do see that. I think we see antagonism towards non-POCs who want progress and growth and peace. I don't really even need to go into all that. And frankly, I don't even think I don't think that's necessarily the point that I even want to dive into. I think what I want to dive into is not experiencing the cheerleaders and Ruby Bridges being escorted to school, but what I want to talk about is the people that John Steinbeck, there were 3 people that John Steinbeck transports on his travels after New Orleans. And I think it pretty well sums up sort of this reality that non-POCs, non-people of color who want to see progress for people of color and to see equality for people of color, don't really know what they're doing. Like they want to help, but they don't know how to help. And it's still like, even for me as a white woman, like what do I do in this whole scenario of racial tension in the country? So the first person we see him pick up is an older Black gentleman who I get the feeling that John Steinbeck feels like he's doing this guy a favor. And the guy that this older Black gentleman, like, is just almost like in fear of like, okay, I'm in this white stranger's car. What is he going to do to me? He's talking to me about all of these hot button issues that apply to Black people, uprisings and integration, and like, what's he going to do with me in his car? Kind of, it's almost like John Steinbeck is trying to help this guy, but the guy he's helping is almost misinterpreting his kindness and his goodwill as almost a threat.
Yeah.
And so the second person that we see get picked up by the author is just a flat out racist white dude who it gets to a point where John Steinbeck's like, he pulls over. He's like, get out of my car. You're disgusting. I can't deal with you.
That moment in the book, I just about cracked up because when he was talking to John Steinbeck and he says, well, no child of mine is ever going to go to an integrated school. And Steinbeck says, so you have children then? He goes, well, no.
No, but if I did.
But if I did.
The third person he picks up is a younger Black gentleman who he's a student. And probably author made it sound like it was maybe like a college age student. Mm-hmm. And in his conversations with this guy, it almost feels like the author is taken aback because this person that he's picked up almost has a more militant approach to how to fix the racism issue, because at one point they do touch on like Martin Luther King, the whole idea of civil disobedience, and this young guy that he's transporting says it's not happening fast enough. Like, we need to do more, we need to be better, we need to take more action. And so I think for me, that part really resonated with me because I think, yes, obviously we still have issues of racism in America, but I can sort of look to that section of the book and say, yeah, we still don't know it. We still don't know what we're doing. And it gets kind of discouraging, but that was really what resonated with me in terms of social issues is, yes, we're aware there's an issue, but is there anything we can really do about it? Kind of an approach.
It's a slow thing.
Yeah.
It's, 300 million hearts and minds changed.
Yep.
In slow motion.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it was just sort of a lucky thing for the country that John Steinbeck happened to be going on this trip at that moment and to have a bit of curiosity to see how the South was faring. And the portrait he paints is kind of bleak.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a helpful corrective when we think about the civil rights movement, because it's tempting to look back and say, it was bad and we fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the answer is, it was bad and we started to fix it and we had no idea what we were doing. And we still have lots of things that need fixing. And we may still have no idea what we're doing. But the important thing, I think, is to recognize the problem and to recognize the fellow dignity and humanity that we see all around us. I love that he contrasts his story in the South with his childhood reminiscences about the one Black family in his town,
Mm-hmm.
Salinas, California, and how this family, basically they had 3 sons. The father was respected in town for a good worker and an able businessman. The wife was respected as a wonderful homemaker. And the 3 sons went off and did great things because no one ever implied to them that they couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that since these were the only Black people I knew, it never occurred to me to think that Black people were inferior in any way. He said, the question that was often asked in the 60s it remains sort of a bellwether. Would you be okay with someone of a different color dating your sister?
Mm-hmm.
And he says in regards to the Coopers, the question never occurred to me, would I be okay with the Coopers dating my sister? Had I ever thought of it, I would have wondered, if the Coopers wouldn't have thought they were too good to date my sister, because they probably were. And it was really a really valuable observation. But I think having communities that can provide that kind of opportunity for people of all colors to thrive and to be who they are and to excel at what they do, that is still an inspiring vision, I think. And something that, we always like to tie this into the church. The church can do that. The church can be that kind of place where every family has a chance to be the Coopers. Every family has the chance to not be held back by what's different about them or by their limitations or by their background, but to be respected for who they are and what they can do and what they can offer, which is always greater than we're immediately aware of. So if every family is valued and given a place to thrive, that's a wonderful vision.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that whole encounter of going to the South and seeing those things, I mean, first of all, it made me really sad. Some of the language that he encounters with some of the white people in the South. I mean, it's like a slap across the face when you read some of that stuff. And then you realize that not a lot has changed in some areas of the country, and a lot of areas of the country. We're still dealing with all of this. But I think what I took out of that whole encounter and the very strong emotions that him going to see the cheerleaders, like I wanted to yell at them myself. All of those strong emotions. It's an inspiring moment for me to think about how I can be part of a solution, how I can look to places and see what I can do to help us move forward, because there are obviously still things that need to change. And there are probably ways that I can personally be a part of that. And so that was the ending of the book was my kick in the pants to think about those things again.
And of course, there are tons of other social issues that he deals with. Some of the ones we talked about, in the book club, the fact that everyone's divided over politics and you mostly keep it to yourself, but the few people you talk about it with, you're probably going to be yelling at.
Nothing has changed.
He talks about migrant workers and immigration and how he hopes that someday we're not too proud or too lazy or too soft to bend to the earth and pick up the things we eat. As a gardener, I have to say amen to that. I really hope that I'm never too good to do work that is hard or humble. Another quote of his. We talked about planned obsolescence and disposable culture. The idea that we're consuming massive amounts of resources to make massive amounts of trash with not a whole lot of steps in between. The loss of localism. The fact that mass media has sort of created a flattening of American culture, and you can hear it in the loss of accented English. That's one of the most obvious areas. We've got psychiatry, political correctness. I mean, it's just so many of the things that he writes about and observes as happening in 1960 are still things that we're living with today. Except, thank goodness, America has mostly gotten over its obsession with powdered eggs. Because that was a particularly gross moment for me when he's in the middle of Wyoming and he stops at a local home and says, "Where can I get, some fresh eggs? This is Wyoming after all." And the guy answered, "I don't know. My missus gets powdered." And I thought, powdered eggs. They were created in World War II to basically keep ration diets alive. And they're nasty. Anyway, so I guess in a few small ways, America has gotten better. We now use cartons of prefab eggs, liquid, not powdered.
No.
Oh. All right. We are probably running short on time, but Sarah.
Do you want to know what the time is right now?
No, I don't. Don't tell me. It's book club. We're allowed to go long for book club, right?
True.
Oh my goodness.
Club.
All right, Sarah, let's dig into it.
Okay, so my question after the last couple, this is not nearly as complex, I don't think. So I chose question number 6. because this was a theme throughout the whole book that I absolutely loved, partially because of my love of coffee. So this is when John Steinbeck went traveling in search of America. He set out to meet, connect with, listen to, and learn from as many ordinary, everyday Americans as he could along the way. What can we as Lutheran ladies learn from this approach about how to be open, friendly, and hospitable to strangers, about how to listen deeply and learn empathy, about how to accept people at face value while appreciating both our similarities and our differences? Are there limits to Steinbeck's approach? If so, how can we as Lutheran ladies, empowered by the gospel, not only learn from, but perhaps even improve on his technique? And maybe part of this is also because it's literally my day job to like talk to people and learn about them. Like this is what I do all the time. And so it's become one of my favorite things to do, to actually learn about people and learn people's stories and have empathy and think about how other people approach situations and learn what other people have been through. And empathy is one of my buzzwords, and I love having coffee with people. So like this is totally my jam right here. But I absolutely loved how in every place that he went, he invited people in. He didn't know these people, but he's like, hey, random person on the side of the road, do you want to come into my camper and have a coffee with me? And maybe I'll even like put some of my hard liqueur in it, because why not? This is fun. But that approach of just having, and I granted he had an agenda because he was writing a book, so he needed to actually learn about people. But
also, he didn't want to get cited for parking in a place where he shouldn't have been parking.
Right, that happened.
That part.
But just having this mindset of being open to learning other people's stories without necessarily having an agenda, without coming into conversations trying to change people's minds, but just having this mindset of learning about people, learning where they're coming from in order to build relationships, because most of us know people and we're going to know them for a long time because of, the magical invention of social media. Even if you move away from people, you're still probably going to keep up with them. So, having this intention of learning about people in order to build relationships, in order to have this long-standing life together with them, of being hospitable and not approaching conversations in order to like jab at them with your own political views, but just to learn about them is a really beautiful thing. And I think, I feel like I say this all the time, but maybe after the last year and a half too, we've all kind of had this awakening of how much that social connection and having those connections to people is actually really important for our mental health too, of knowing that we can talk with people on a deeper level than just like, hey, the weather's great today. How was your day at work? We can have these deeper conversations about what we actually are feeling and thinking, and having those connections is really kind of important, especially in the church when we have new people show up at church, bringing them into the fold, saying hi, being like, hey, come sit next to me at Bible study because I want to get to know you more, and just being open to those conversations. Somebody did mention that being an introvert makes this really hard, and I totally understand that. I hate small talk. However, just being out and about shopping and stuff, randomly like mentioning to someone that you like their shoes or you like their dress, or and this might be like really creepy, but I do it to people at the store. If I see them looking at a product when I'm in a grocery store and I really like it, I'm like, hey, that's a really great thing. You should buy it. I use it all the time.
Are you a Midwesterner by any chance? Because that's a Midwestern thing, and I miss it so much.
Totally like born and raised Midwest.
I love complimenting randos. It's my favorite thing.
But you're right, Sarah, and actually introversion can give you a leg up in this if you go into a conversation with the intention of being a story gatherer.
Yes.
I want to learn your story. One, you've automatically got a topic of conversation. I want to know about the person in front of me. There we go. I don't even have to talk that much. Just ask a question and say, every once in a while.
Right.
So
it works.
But it helps you to value, it's human nature to want to look for people who are like us, find points of commonality and like-mindedness. But being a story gatherer also helps you to value the points of distinction, the different points of view, because if everyone has the same story, you get bored really fast. But when you go story gathering and find a whole lot of different stories, then your life is just so full and rich. I also loved his mobile liquor cabinet. And I'm ashamed to say this out loud because, I mean, why should I take so much delight in him basically... his first stop on his road trip was where he basically bought out a liquor store.
Mhm.
He got some of everything.
You need the essentials. You need
He
the
did.
essentials.
But you know what it did for him? Because he was, I mean, camp cooking was not particularly sophisticated at this point. He was mostly living on canned stew. What it allowed him to do was offer something really special
Mhm.
to guests.
Alcohol is going to loosen the tongues of
It is. It is. It sure is.
wanted them to tell their stories, and that's going to ease that along.
Now, I'm not saying that every church potluck should come with an open bar.
That's expensive.
It is expensive. But I am saying that this principle of being equipped to serve something really nice, the good stuff, to, you know, the people that you welcome in your life, even if they're perfect strangers. I think this is something that Lutheran women are really good at, and we can do even better. Like this is a sweet spot for us, ladies. This principle of come on in, have a cup of coffee, and all right, maybe not a dollop of whiskey, but how about a dollop of whipped cream and a slice of pie on the side? You know, that we are ready to give something special to the people that we see. And hopefully, unlike Steinbeck, who was just going for these single serving relationships that he could stuff into his book, we're looking for the kind of relationship that is going to end up with all of us standing around the throne, singing God's praises together for eternity. This is not a one-off deal for us. This is the beginning of something wonderful, or at least we hope it will be.
Definitely.
Yes.
All right, well, then we should probably close the book on the book. Slap, slam. I left my book over on my nightstand. All right, close it. Very nice.
It's not as nice as yours, though. I'm so jealous of your old one with the map and everything.
I got the vintage one. I almost bought myself a new one, but then I decided to just do the old librarian trick of stuffing Elmer's glue down the binding, and it worked.
Yes.
So I was very happy to get one more.
The cover of mine is beautiful, and I love it, but I think I like yours better because of the map.
Get out.
It's okay. I do too. End papers are a dying art. If you can find a book with good end papers, that is really special.
I love it.
Well, mine got narrated by Gary Sinise, who, little known fact, is the only person who actually sounds the way he looks in Hollywood. So
I do find it interesting that you guys, the two of you, did audiobook, and I actually read like a real book this time. I'm like audiobook queen, but this was my lunch book, and it was amazing.
I'm so proud of you, Sarah.
You have changed my life, Rachel. I'm reading books.
Gosh, you guys, this is the moment.
All right, are you ready? Are you ready to read another book?
Yup.
Give it to us.
Okay. So our next book club is going to take place in the middle of October, which for every good Lutheran is Reformation season.
Yes.
Now, I thought briefly about making everyone read like the Book of Concord for book club, but that's like expert level, and I don't. We'll do that some other time.
Our viewership, thank you very much.
Yeah. But I have another angle that we can work with.
All right.
And that is, there are a number of books that were written actually within the last 100 years. We'll call them modern Lutheran classics, that I feel like every Lutheran should read or should have read. And unfortunately, I have not read them. Not all of them. I have read some of them. I have read some of them part way, but have not finished them. I have read some of them not at all. And I feel like there may be other people out there who are in this boat who hear about a book or an author and think, oh yeah, I should really have read that. But I haven't. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to put forward 3 possibilities for our October Reformation. Let's call it modern classics that Rachel should have read, but somehow hasn't all the way yet. Sorry.
It's very long.
I love it.
And so we've got 3 contenders, and I'm not going to make you all, I would like you guys to weigh in on whether you've read them and whether you're interested in them, have heard them, or whatever. But we're going to wait and let our Facebook group people make the final call on which of these is going to be our 2021 Reformation read. So sometime within the next week, we'll get a poll up there, and you'll get to not only weigh in on these 3 books, but if there's another book you think there's a good chance that we should have read and haven't yet, feel free to add it to the stack. But I've got 3 to suggest. One of them is one that I know a couple of you have read, and I've actually read like halfway into it, but I never finished it because I was reading it for a college class and I ran out of time and I didn't finish it. And this would be the modern Lutheran classic, The Hammer of God by Bo Yeats.
Oh,
the
Read it.
Swedish. You've read it? Okay.
For
Not
class, not by choice.
Okay.
Oh.
It's a novel, sort of a novel. It's basically 3 novellas, or is it 4 novellas, squished together in one novel. The novel is basically about a parish in Sweden and the different pastors, different Lutheran pastors who serve there, and the various crises and internal and external that they face, and how they deal with them with solid Lutheran theology. I remember starting the book. I remember enjoying it very much. And then I remember the end of the term coming and not finishing it. And I feel like this is a great injustice in life that needs to be corrected at some point. So, Hammer of God. Bree, you've read it. Sarah, have you read it?
No.
No.
I own it, but I haven't read it.
I have 2 copies. Erin?
And I have read it, and I recall enjoying it, although I could not tell you the plot of the story. It has been 20 years probably since I read it.
Okay, so you're overdue for a reread.
Uh-huh.
All right, so we'll definitely keep this one on the stack.
Okay.
Book number 2, and I believe this one just came out in a 2nd edition. I have the 1st edition. And so if we pick this, I will probably read the 1st. I might spring for the 2nd. Anyway, this would be Dr. Jean Edward Veith Jr.'s The Spirituality of the Cross, The Way of the First Evangelicals.
I own the 1st edition of that too. Also have not read it. I own a lot of books that I haven't read.
There's a lot of confession happening here on the Lutheran Ladies Lounge today.
That's what it's for.
So this one, the first one is fiction. This one is nonfiction. It's also fairly short. So unless the 2nd edition like doubled the size, I feel like this one might be a contender just because it's short. But I love Dr. Veith's work. I think his work on postmodernism is amazing. He writes regularly for the Lutheran Witness, so I got to work with him through that. And I've always found him just a really deeply insightful Lutheran layman who thinks a lot about the world and how Lutheran theology fits into it. So I think this would be a really interesting read. So Sarah, you own it but have not read it. Either of the other of you guys, have you read it? Nope. All right, this one's new to everybody. And then finally, we have a modern Lutheran classic from the Reverend Dr. John Kleinig, who was, I think he's retired now, but the head of biblical studies at Australian Lutheran College in Adelaide, who comes over to the United States regularly to give us a good dose of his wonderful biblical theology. And he's a delightful human being in real life, too. I wish I'd met Bo Yeats, but I've met Dr. Veith and Dr. Kleinig, and they're both fantastic. But this book is Grace Upon Grace, Spirituality for Today. And this is a book that my husband has told me to read about a dozen times, and I haven't yet. So this is another spirituality title, but Lutheran spirituality, you can't go wrong. And Dr. Kleinig has such a warm and wonderful way of writing about things like this that I feel like this would be, even though it's a little longer than Dr. Veith's book, would be a very pleasant journey, I suspect.
Okay.
Any other interactions with Grace Upon Grace? This a new one?
I don't
No.
own it. I have not read it.
Wow.
I know.
We
I don't
are
think
righting wrongs today, ladies.
Yes, we are. We are doing that.
I'll have to check my bookshelf, though. There's a lot of books I picked up in a CPH warehouse sale, and I don't really remember what I own.
So you may have these. There was a 4th title that I've heard a ton about, and people quote it all the time, and I wanted very much to include it in this, and that was Herman Sasse's The Lonely Way. However,
Super sorry.
super
Hungry.
hungry dog interrupts talk. Okay, I love you too, Tooper. I really wanted to include Herman Sasse's The Lonely Way on this because the quotes I read online are so good. I dug it off my husband's shelf. It's like 2 volumes and like 300 pages each. So read it on your own if you like, but I won't add that to the stack for this time.
Okay.
But anyway,
Fair
those are my 3 Lutheran classics, modern Lutheran classics that I really should have read but haven't quite managed to yet. And I would love to hear from each of you ladies on here and in the Facebook group which one we should actually read for our October Reformation Book Club read.
That's going to be a hard choice. And I have a feeling that list might get really long.
It might, but we're all about discovering new Lutheran gems.
And
so
at the very
I'm
least,
excited.
it'll be a nice reference list for when we all want to read the books that are on our shelves that we have not read yet.
Exactly. And you know, a lot of people like to use the book club discussions as a way to source new reads from like the ones that they have not, you know, that were not picked for actual book club discussion, but mentioned. Yeah. So this will be a great opportunity.
And that list, we do have a list of all of the previous books that we've mentioned in the podcast that is in the Lutheran Ladies Lounge Facebook group under the Files tab, I'm pretty sure. It's a file in the group. And if you can't find it, ask and we'll show you where it is.
I'll be updating that now that Sarah's mentioned it in the next few days. And then Facebook will make it pop up fresh for you. So there you go.
There you go. It'll be there.
I will say, for my opinion, I would be leaning towards either the Veith book or the Hammer of God. Because I remember really enjoying the Hammer of God, but I don't remember it clear enough. And the Veith one sounds a little more manageable lengthwise. So that's what I'm inclined towards. But I'm going to be open to any of these. So I will happily go with whatever book wins. I'll read it.
Same.
All right. Can't wait to see. It's going to be a wild ride for sure. All right. That's all I got.
Oh my goodness. This was so fun. I loved the book that we read. It's going to be super great to do a Lutheran modern classic for our next one. So ladies, join our Facebook group if you're not there already so you can vote on that poll. And so you have a voice in what we read next and to find all of the list of books that are probably going to end up on that list of modern Lutheran classics. Join our group on Facebook. Find all of our book club discussions there as well. You can find all of our podcasts at kfuo.org or on your favorite podcasting app or on our KFUO radio app, which you can download on Android or Apple. You are listening to the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Erin.
I'm Charley's crooked front teeth.
And I'm John Steinbeck's special cup of coffee.
With special guest Tooper.
That's right.
Views and opinions expressed on the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast may not represent the official position of the management or ownership of KFUO Radio, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The Lutheran Ladies Lounge is produced by KFUO Radio and available at kfuo.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Join our community on Facebook in the Lutheran Ladies Lounge. We're at an hour right now.
Oh, told you this was a good book. No, you told me this was a good book.
Good book.
So good.
All right.